Long before the great deluge arrived, long before the history we have recorded even began, beings from the celestial realm made a decision that would permanently change humanity's trajectory. These entities left behind their stations in the heavens to chase after love that was forbidden with women of mortal flesh. What emerged from this was a race of hybrid giants, creatures possessing strength beyond nature, and a hunger for brutality that nearly pushed the world into total annihilation. What follows is the full account of that prohibited joining, the creatures it brought into being, and the reason this story from ancient times still fascinates and frightens us after thousands of years have passed. Our journey begins by uncovering a passage shrouded in mystery. Just 4 verses. That's the only amount needed to shatter your entire understanding of the world in ancient times. The 6th chapter of Genesis begins with humanity multiplying across the face of the earth. Numbers increase, families grow larger, the world existing before the great flood teems with living beings. Then something in the text changes. Those called the sons of God observed the daughters of humanity. These celestial beings saw the beauty possessed by these mortal women. They selected them to become their wives, taking whichever ones they desired. In those ancient days, the Nephilim walked upon the earth. These were giants, warriors of great fame, fighters whose reputation spread across entire generations. Following this, God makes his declaration. His tolerance has reached its limit. Waters of judgment begin to rise. Contained within those 4 brief verses and the flood that follows, rests a puzzle that has troubled religious scholars, academics, and spiritual seekers across thousands of years. What transpired during those days that came before the deluge? Who exactly were these entities called the sons of God? Through what means did giants come to walk among humanity? What form of corruption spread so completely and thoroughly that the one who created everything chose to cleanse the world with water and begin creation fresh? The Scripture offers no explanation. It merely presents these facts as truth before continuing forward. The daughters possessed beauty. Forbidden partnerships took place. Giants came into existence. Total destruction followed behind. However, sources from ancient times that were kept outside the recognized canon present a very different narrative. These texts speak of rebellion that began in the celestial realm and concluded in the deepest parts of the earth. They lay out a plot among divine entities, who deserted their assigned duties to chase desires that were forbidden. They provide details about the birth of monstrous beings and the sharing of secrets that human minds were never supposed to possess. This story goes beyond being a simple account of human evil and wickedness. What we have here is the chronicle of a barrier that was violated, a dividing line established between the realm of the divine and the sphere of mortals that powerful entities deliberately erased. The repercussions spread throughout all of creation, corrupting the very substance of flesh and compelling God's hand toward judgment. The puzzle starts with those 4 brief verses. Yet the consequences extend from a time before the world's foundation all the way to the final day of judgment that still lies ahead. Who were these sons of God exactly? For what reason did they come down from heaven? What became of the children they produced? And why does this catastrophe from ancient history hold significance for the cosmic battle that continues raging even now? The solutions rest concealed within texts both ancient and disputed, inside books that were excluded from Scripture's final collection, yet were referenced by apostles and held in high regard by believers in the earliest days. In fragments kept alive by cultures spread across the entire earth, each culture remembering an era when giants moved among ordinary people and the world descended into complete chaos, we start at the very beginning, with the watchers positioned in heaven, with the sacred responsibility they carried and the horrific choice they would make. The earth stands ready to be transformed forever. Those who watched from the heavens. Prior to the rebellion occurring, there existed order and structure. The sons of God carried out their service within the divine council chamber. These were not symbolic representations, not flowery language referring to faithful human men or righteous family lines. The text in Hebrew employs a particular term, B'nai Elohim, meaning the sons of divine beings. These entities make appearances throughout the ancient holy writings. They stand assembled before the throne of God. They deliver reports concerning their assigned tasks. They maintain oversight of nations and territories given to them by the Most High. Within the book of Job, we find the sons of God presenting themselves in the Lord's presence. Walking among them arrives the adversary, the one who accuses and will put Job's faithfulness to the test. This gathering does not depict humans coming together for prayer. What we see are celestial beings arriving to report for their duties. The watchers possessed rank among these beings. Earth was their assignment, specifically humanity, the expanding descendants of Adam who filled the valleys and plains with their numbers. From their assigned positions, they watched. They kept their eyes on the development of civilization in its earliest stages, the construction of cities, the advancement of various skills, the separation into tribes and family clans, the birth of culture. Their responsibility involved oversight, minus any interference, simply to observe, to deliver reports, to preserve the boundary separating the heavenly domain from the earthly one. They possessed understanding far beyond what human minds could grasp, the mysteries of the cosmos itself, the patterns governing stars and changing seasons, the qualities contained within plants and metals, the actual names of all things, the words carrying power capable of bending reality itself. This understanding was never intended for minds bound by mortality. The watchers grasped this truth. They recognized the dangers inherent in revelation divorced from wisdom, in power separated from character, in knowledge granted without the maturity required to use it correctly. They also possessed forms that transcended mere flesh. When necessary, they could manifest as men, assuming physical shape to bring messages or carry out judgments. Yet their authentic nature surpassed all limitations imposed by blood and bone. They radiated glory, shone with radiance, wielded power beyond any measure. They also possessed free will, and when freedom combines with closeness to temptation, the conditions emerge for catastrophe. The watchers observed absolutely everything: the rise of civilization among humans, the beauty displayed by mortal women, the brief lives of creatures who existed and loved and perished within mere decades, never experiencing the burden carried by eternity. Something started stirring among these watchers. A dissatisfaction began growing, a longing that evolved from simple observation into consuming obsession. Their purpose was to watch from a safe distance, to stay separate, to keep their citizenship in heaven while carrying out their earthly responsibilities. Yet maintaining that distance became increasingly challenging. The daughters of humanity grew more plentiful, more attractive, more captivating to eyes that had witnessed heaven's glory but never experienced the warmth found in mortal embrace. The watchers started contemplating various possibilities, holding discussions among themselves, wondering what the experience would be like if they descended completely, if they abandoned the posts assigned to them, if they crossed that boundary and experienced directly what they had only observed. 200 of them assembled in secrecy. They shared their thoughts openly, their longings, their readiness to give up everything for the purpose of forbidden partnership. However, they also grasped the enormity of what they were considering. This went beyond simple acts of disobedience. This represented cosmic rebellion, a decision from which no reversal would ever be possible. They would require a plan, a binding pact, a method to guarantee that no one among them could retreat once the choice was finalized. They would need to bind themselves together through an oath so dreadful that the burden of guilt would rest equally on every single participant. The watchers made preparations for their descent, but first they needed to gather upon a mountain and speak an oath that would permanently seal their destiny. The beauty found in humanity's daughters. The world existing before the flood was far from primitive. Academics who picture crude cave-dwelling savages have completely misunderstood what the text conveys. Adam's descendants constructed cities, created tools through forging, produced music, advanced agriculture, and the keeping of livestock. Cain constructed the very first city and gave it his son Enoch's name. Among his descendants was Jabal, who became skilled at raising livestock. Jubal invented both the harp and flute. Tubal-Cain learned to forge tools from bronze and iron. By the point when the watchers were contemplating their descent, civilization among humans had progressed through multiple generations. Centers of population marked the landscape of that ancient world. Routes for trade-connected communities separated by great distances, culture was flourishing. And with each passing generation, the daughters of humanity increased in number. The Hebrew Scripture describes them using a single, specific word, tovot, good in nature, fair in appearance, beautiful to behold. This beauty extended beyond merely physical qualities, though attraction to physical form certainly played its role. The word carries implications of desirability, of possessing a pleasing nature to those who gaze upon them, of having qualities that capture the eye and hold attention. The exact population of the world before the flood remains unknown to us. Certain calculations built on genealogies and recorded lifespans point toward millions. Other proposals suggest tens of millions. The precise number holds less importance than the reality we know. Human pavement spread throughout the earth in tremendous numbers, and among them existed women whose beauty captured the attention of beings who should have stayed above such attractions. The watchers kept their eyes on these women throughout their daily existence, drawing water up from wells, laboring in cultivated fields, taking part in festival celebrations, passing through crowded markets, caring for their children. They observed more than just physical form. They saw vitality itself. Life burning with intensity, yet brief in duration. Passion untouched by the exhaustion that comes from eternal existence. Joy remaining pure, not weighed down by countless ages. The daughters of humanity lived with complete fullness, because forever was not theirs to claim. They loved with great depth because time moved quickly. They embraced each experience because the next day carried no guarantees. This intensity characterizing mortal existence held great fascination for the watchers. They possessed eternity stretching before them, yet perhaps lacked the deep appreciation that arrives from understanding your days are numbered. However, something operating at a deeper level than simple attraction was at work here. The text employs the phrase, "They chose for themselves." This language suggests careful selection, thoughtful deliberation, the exercising of willpower in pursuit of what they desired. The watchers were not suddenly overwhelmed by uncontrollable passion. They arrived at calculated decisions. They observed, they desired, they made plans, they chose deliberately. This act of choosing violated the fundamental structure of creation itself. The divine realm and the mortal sphere were designed to stay distinct, separate domains with separate purposes and limitations. Angels possessed the ability to assume human form temporarily for particular assignments. They could appear as men, consume meals, walk along dusty roads. Yet this was imitation, not genuine transformation. They were not becoming human, in essence. They were wearing humanity like clothing that could be removed when needed. What the watchers were contemplating extended far beyond temporary appearance. Their plan involved descending permanently, assuming flesh not as a disguise but as a permanent dwelling place, joining themselves to mortal women in unions capable of producing offspring. The biological implications by themselves should have caused them to pause and reconsider. What occurs when the seed from an immortal being mingles with the egg from a mortal woman? What sort of creature emerges from such a union? The watchers either failed to consider these questions properly or simply didn't care about whatever answers might exist. Their desire pushed aside their wisdom. Their lust overwhelmed their sense of duty. They gazed upon the daughters of humanity and arrived at their choice. Yet they recognized that the enormous scale of this rebellion demanded solidarity among them. If even a single watcher turned back from the plan, if even one among them reported their intentions to the Most High, the entire conspiracy would collapse into failure. They needed an oath, a binding so terrible in nature that none among them would dare violate it, a shared burden of guilt so complete that retreat would become impossible. They selected a mountain for this specific purpose, an elevated place where heaven and earth appeared to touch one another, a location that would be forever associated with the moment when divine beings transformed into rebels, the oath spoken on Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon rises toward the north. Its 3 peaks wear crowns of snow even during summer months. The ancient texts, kept within the Book of Enoch, name this mountain with specificity. 200 watchers gathered upon its slopes. They arrived from their various assigned posts, scattered across the earth, leaving their responsibilities behind to assemble in secret rebellion. Leading them was Shemihaza, known as Samyaza in certain traditions. He possessed rank among the watchers. When his voice spoke, the others gave him their attention. Yet even Shemihaza understood clearly the risk involved. Descending by himself would mean carrying all the guilt by himself alone. If others among them experienced a change of mind after he had already fallen, he would stand before judgment isolated and lacking any allies. He put forward the proposal for the oath. Each watcher would make their commitment by invoking binding curses upon themselves. They would render themselves guilty together as one. The descent would be collective in nature. The rebellion would be shared with perfect equality among all who participated. No one could make a claim of innocence. No one could turn into an informant. No one could pursue pardon by exposing the others. The Hebrew understanding of an oath carried significance beyond what modern minds grasp. To swear meant to call upon divine witness. To bind yourself through curses meant to summon destruction down upon your own head if the vow was broken. These beings understood with precision exactly what such an oath signified. They comprehended the spiritual mechanics involved in binding and loosing. They grasped the implications extending into eternity. They swore the oath anyway. 200 voices, speaking words of commitment in unison. 200 beings crossing a boundary from which no return would ever be possible. 200 watchers became 200 rebels in the space required to speak an oath. The Book of Enoch keeps a record of some among their names. Shemihaza led them. Azazel stood among the chiefs, the one destined to later teach humanity the secrets of making war and pursuing vanity. Others bearing names included Arachiel, who taught the signs found in the earth; Barachiel, who taught the practice of astrology; Kokabeel, who revealed knowledge of the constellations; Ezekiel, who taught understanding of the clouds; Armoros, who taught the releasing of enchantments. Each one brought specialized understanding. Each one carried secrets never intended for mortal minds to possess. Each one prepared themselves to share forbidden wisdom with the women they intended to take as wives. The oath bound them together in conspiracy, yet it also marked the point from which no return existed. Once the words were spoken, they could not be withdrawn. Once the oath was sworn, the commitment could not be unmade. Mount Hermon became the location of the most catastrophic rebellion since Lucifer's fall. And unlike that earlier rebellion, this one would directly contaminate the bloodline of humanity and corrupt all flesh walking upon the earth. The watchers descended together as one. They departed from their heavenly stations. They abandoned their first estate, their original dwelling place existing in God's presence. They passed through the firmament, crossing the barrier separating heaven from earth. They assumed solid form, biological form capable of reproduction. They manifested among humanity as beings radiating terrible beauty and overwhelming power, shining with radiance, magnificent in appearance, impossible to resist. The daughters of humanity looked upon them and found themselves unable to turn away. The descent occurred. They fell like stars tumbling from heaven. The imagery makes repeated appearances throughout ancient texts. Celestial beings descending downward, light transforming into flesh, the immortal assuming mortal form. Yet this was not the merciful descent characteristic of messengers bringing good news to humanity. This represented abandonment of duty, desertion from assigned posts, cosmic rebellion made visible and tangible. The watchers who had sworn their oath upon Hermon now moved among humanity. They made no attempt to conceal their supernatural nature. They appeared as beings radiating power and possessing knowledge, giving off an otherworldly glory that marked them as different from common men. The daughters of humanity saw them clearly and understood that these were no ordinary suitors presenting themselves. These beings possessed strength surpassing human capacity, knowledge surpassing human discovery, beauty surpassing human comparison. The ancient text states simply, "They took wives." The construction in Hebrew suggests active choosing, deliberate selection. These were not chance encounters or courtships built on mutual interest. The watchers exercised their superior power to claim the women they had set their desire upon. Some traditions suggest the women went along willingly, dazzled by the radiant glory of these beings. Other hints point toward coercion, toward power being used to overcome any resistance. The text provides no specific details. It only provides a record of the fact that unions occurred between the sons of God and the daughters of humanity. These were not spiritual unions or marriages existing only in symbol. The watchers had assumed biological form specifically for the purpose of physical union. They possessed reproductive systems that functioned properly. They could generate seed. The women became pregnant. The pregnancies progressed unlike any that had occurred before or have occurred since. The mothers were carrying offspring that were neither fully divine nor fully human in nature. Hybrid creatures with the genetics of both heaven and earth combining inside the womb. The periods of gestation may have extended longer than normal. The mothers may have experienced complications unknown in regular pregnancy. The ancient texts provide no details on these matters, yet they emphasize what resulted. The Nephilim came into the world. The word itself remains subject to debate. Some translate it as giants, others as fallen ones. Still others translate it as those who cause others to fall. The root points toward falling, descending, crashing downward from a height. These children, born of forbidden union, experienced rapid growth. They possessed size surpassing human proportion, strength surpassing human capacity, appetites surpassing human satisfaction. The early church father Eusebius, referencing sources even older, claimed some among them reached heights of 15 feet or greater. Other traditions from ancient times suggest even more enormous statures for certain individuals. Yet their size was not their only characteristic that defied normalcy. They possessed enhanced strength, drawing from their angelic heritage. They reached maturity quickly, developing adult capabilities while still young in chronological terms. And they exhibited violence. The Nephilim did not integrate into human society in peaceful ways. They dominated society completely. Their superior size and strength made them natural warriors. Their aggressive natures transformed them into predators. The earth started filling up with violence. The word used in Hebrew is Hamas, signifying not just physical aggression alone, but injustice, cruelty, wrongful treatment of others. The social order fell apart under the weight of these beings who acknowledged no authority and honored no boundaries. The Watchers, having reached their goal of union with mortal women, now turned their attention toward another act that was forbidden. They started to teach. The giants come into being. The Nephilim were wrong in their very existence from the start. Biology itself protested against their being. They were creatures that should never have been born, emerging from unions that should never have taken place. The ancient texts describe them using terms that emphasize their hybrid nature. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures employs the word gigantes, from which our word giants is derived. Yet the emphasis extends beyond mere size alone. These beings possessed characteristics inherited from both their parents. From their mothers they received flesh, blood, mortality, and appetites tied to the earth. From their fathers they received strength, knowledge, and qualities that went beyond normal human limitations. What resulted was instability. They grew at rapid rates, reaching adult size within years rather than the decades required for humans. Their strength increased in proportion. A Nephilim still in childhood could overpower a fully grown man. A Nephilim who had reached adulthood could tear animals into pieces using only bare hands. Their appetites matched their enormous size. They consumed food in quantities that placed strain on the resources of entire communities. The Book of Enoch describes them devouring the produce belonging to all people until the population could no longer sustain them. When food grown by humans became insufficient for their needs, the giants turned to predatory behavior. They started consuming the flesh of animals. Then, when even that proved inadequate for their hunger, they turned upon humanity itself. The text describes them consuming human flesh and drinking human blood. Cannibalism and vampirism combined together, the ultimate violation of the order built into creation. These were not noble beings, engaged in struggle with their nature. These were monsters wearing the appearance of humanity while possessing the souls of demons. Their presence destabilized civilization completely. How do you enforce laws against beings capable of tearing down your walls? How do you protect your family from creatures who view humans as food? The Nephilim took wives in the same manner as their fathers had done, though whether their offspring possessed viability remains unclear in the texts. If they possessed the ability to reproduce, the genetic contamination would spread even further outward. Some sources from ancient times make mention of Nephilim from different generations. Giants producing more giants, the bloodline perpetuating itself, the corruption deepening with each year that passed. They earned reputations for themselves. The text calls them men of renown, warriors whose exploits were remembered and told repeatedly. Yet renown built upon violence and terror is infamy, not honor. The earth groaned beneath their weight. Creation itself was being twisted away from its intended purpose. The image of God within humanity was being corrupted through mixture with the seed of rebellious angels. However, the Nephilim were only part of the problem facing creation. Their fathers, the fallen watchers, contributed to the corruption through a different means. They started teaching their secrets, the knowledge that was forbidden. The watchers possessed knowledge of things humanity was never meant to learn. They understood the properties contained within metals and stones. They knew the movements governing celestial bodies. They comprehended the hidden powers residing in plants and roots. They possessed understanding of spiritual mechanics, of words and signs capable of manipulating reality itself. In heaven, this knowledge served purposes that were righteous. The watchers employed their understanding to fulfill their duties, to maintain order, to serve the will of the Most High. On earth, divorced from divine authority, and pursuing desires that were selfish, they weaponized this knowledge. Azazel taught men the art of making war. He showed them how to forge swords from bronze and iron, how to craft shields and breastplates, how to make weapons of war capable of piercing flesh and shattering bone. Before Azazel provided his instruction, conflicts were settled using stones and wooden clubs. After his instruction, humanity possessed the means for organized slaughter on scales never before seen. He also provided teaching to the women. He showed them the art of applying cosmetics, how to grind stones into powder for the eyes, how to extract dyes from plants for the lips, how to use metals for ornaments and jewelry. This might appear innocent when compared to weapons of war, yet the text presents it as part of the same corruption, the artificial enhancement of beauty, the vanity and deception involved in appearing other than what you truly are. Shemihaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. This was sorcery, the manipulation of natural and spiritual forces through secret knowledge and rituals that were forbidden. Armoros taught the releasing of enchantments, the counterspells and protections. If Shemihaza taught how to curse, Armoros taught how to break curses. Barakil taught astrology, not the simple observation of stars for navigation or calendars, but the belief that celestial bodies controlled human destiny. The idea that your fate was written in the movements of planets and could be read by those with knowledge. Kokabeel taught the science of constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds, weather prediction, and manipulation. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, perhaps earthquake prediction or other knowledge related to the earth itself. Each watcher contributed specialized instruction. Each piece of forbidden knowledge pushed humanity further into corruption. The problem was not knowledge in itself. Understanding creation is good when pursued in submission to the Creator. Yet this knowledge came separated from wisdom, power divorced from character, information separated from the spiritual maturity required to handle it properly. Humanity gained the ability to make war using metal weapons, yet not the wisdom to choose peace. They learned to manipulate their appearance, yet not to develop inner character. They discovered how to curse enemies, yet not how to love them. The watchers treated their wives and the larger human community as students. They established schools teaching forbidden arts. They passed down techniques that would echo through later traditions involving the occult. Sorcery, astrology, enchantments, divination, the secret knowledge that Moses would later command the people to reject utterly. These practices did not originate through human discovery. They were taught by fallen angels pursuing their own agenda, and the teaching accelerated the corruption already spreading throughout the earth. The Nephilim filled the earth with physical violence. The watchers filled it with spiritual corruption. Between the two forces, creation groaned under a weight it was never designed to carry, and the earth itself started to cry out. The cries rising from the earth, creation possesses a voice. The ancient understanding recognized this truth. The land could receive blessings or curses. The ground could yield its produce, or refuse to do so. The very stones themselves could cry out when necessary. In the days when the Nephilim walked, the earth cried out against the violence being done upon it. Blood spilled through murder pollutes the ground. The first unlawful taking of life, when Cain struck down Abel, resulted in the ground crying out to God. The blood of the innocent speaks from the dust. Now multiply that single cry by thousands, by tens of thousands, by however many humans fell victim to the violence of the giants and the wickedness of humanity in its corrupted state. The earth became saturated with blood from the innocent. The ground drank it reluctantly, groaning beneath the weight of injustice. Yet blood was not the only thing crying out. The Book of Enoch describes the spirits of those who perished beneath the teeth and hands of the Nephilim, the souls of the murdered crying for justice, the victims demanding that God hear their suffering and respond. These were not ghosts in the modern sense we understand. The text presents them as the life force, the spirit given by God, now cut off prematurely and crying out for vindication. The four archangels heard these cries. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel listened to the groaning of creation and the pleading of the martyred. They brought the matter before the throne. The text found in Enoch presents this as a formal accusation. The watchers have abandoned their assigned posts. They have corrupted humanity. They have taught secrets that were forbidden. They have fathered monsters that are hybrid in nature. The earth is filled with violence and injustice. What will the Most High do in response? The answer would arrive. Yet first, the full extent of the corruption needed to be understood completely. All flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. The phrase makes its appearance in Genesis and carries enormous implications. Not just humanity alone, but all flesh. The genetic contamination had spread beyond hybrids, combining human and angel. Some sources from ancient times suggest the watchers or their offspring experimented with other species, mixing kinds, creating chimeras, violating the boundaries God had established at creation when he made each thing according to its kind. The evidence is sparse and controversial. Yet the phrase all flesh in Hebrew typically includes animals. And the command given to Noah specified preserving animals according to their kinds, suggesting that purity of bloodline mattered even for beasts. Whether through direct genetic manipulation or through some spiritual corruption that affected biology, the created order was being unmade. The careful distinctions of the creation week were being erased. Chaos was returning. The violence of the giants, the forbidden knowledge spread by the watchers, the genetic corruption of all flesh, the cries of the innocent, the groaning of creation itself. The situation was catastrophic beyond repair through normal means. You could not simply remove the Nephilim and expect everything to return to normal. The corruption had spread too far. The knowledge could not be forgotten. The bloodlines were already mixed. Something radical was required, something that would cleanse the earth completely and start again. Yet before the judgment could fall, God would provide a witness, a prophet who would speak to both the condemned and the preserved, a man who walked with God, and would carry a message to the rebellious watchers themselves, Enoch the scribe. Enoch walked with God. The phrase makes its appearance twice in Genesis, a literary emphasis that marks him as unique. Other men are described as righteous or as finding favor. Only Enoch is said to walk with God. He was the seventh from Adam, son of Jared, father of Methuselah. He lived 365 years. A number matching the days of the solar year, perhaps suggesting cosmic significance. Then he was not, for God took him. Enoch did not experience death. He did not see corruption. He was translated, taken directly from earth to heaven without passing through death. Only one other person before the flood would receive this honor, and that would come later. Yet before his translation, Enoch served as prophet and scribe. The ancient texts outside the canon, preserved in fragments and quoted by early believers, describe his role in the crisis of the watchers. God summoned Enoch to the heavenly court. The apocalyptic visions recorded in the Book of Enoch described journeys through various heavens, observations of celestial mechanics, revelations concerning future judgment. Yet the most significant assignment involved the watchers themselves. They had taken wives. They had fathered the Nephilim. They had taught knowledge that was forbidden, and now they faced the consequences. The watchers, understanding that judgment was approaching, approached Enoch. They asked him to intercede on their behalf, to write a petition, to present their case before the throne. Think about the absurdity found in this request. Beings who had walked in the presence of God, who had seen His glory directly, who had served in the heavenly council, now needed a human intermediary because they had forfeited their access. Enoch agreed to carry their petition. He wrote down their words. He presented himself before the throne. The answer was absolute denial. God would not forgive the watchers. They had known better. They had possessed full understanding of what they were doing. They had willfully chosen rebellion, with eyes wide open. Enoch received a message to carry back to the watchers. It was not good news. The text describes his return to the fallen angels, perhaps meeting them at Hermon, where they had sworn their original oath. He read them the verdict of heaven. They would be bound, imprisoned in the depths of the earth, chained in darkness for 70 generations until the day of final judgment. Their angelic power would not save them. Their knowledge would not free them. Their unions would not continue. The Nephilim, their offspring, would perish. When the giants died, their spirits would not rest like human spirits. They would become something new and terrible. Wandering demons, unclean spirits, beings without bodies, seeking hosts, tormenting humanity. The watchers would watch their children become demons. They would spend millennia in chains, knowing that their moment of lust had eternal consequences. They would await final judgment, already condemned, without hope of pardon or reprieve. Enoch delivered this message without sympathy. He had seen the violence. He had witnessed the corruption. He understood that the watchers deserved everything coming to them. The fallen angels heard their doom. Some among them wept, others raged. All understood that their rebellion had failed utterly. Yet before the watchers could be bound, before the judgment could fully execute, their offspring still walked the earth. The Nephilim still terrorized humanity. The violence still escalated daily. The giants had to be dealt with. And the method would cleanse not just them, but the entire corrupted earth, the judgment of the watchers. The sentence came from the throne of heaven, delivered through Michael and the other archangels. Bind them. The watchers who had descended to earth, who had taken wives and fathered giants, who had taught knowledge that was forbidden and corrupted all flesh, would not be permitted to continue their rebellion. They would be imprisoned, not annihilated, but bound, confined to a prison prepared specifically for rebellious angels. The texts call this place Tartarus. Peter references it in his epistle using the specific Greek verb tartarou, to cast into Tartarus. Jude confirms the account describing angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, now reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. These chains were not physical restraints. Spiritual beings require spiritual imprisonment. The chains were limitations placed on their power, barriers erected around their ability to act, confinement to specific locations deep in the earth. Some traditions locate this prison beneath the earth in caverns and depths inaccessible to humans. Others suggest a different dimension entirely, a darkness that exists alongside our reality, yet separated from it. The duration of their imprisonment was specified clearly, 70 generations. From the time of binding until the final judgment, they would remain conscious, aware, suffering, yet unable to escape or continue their rebellion. 70 generations, counting from the flood, this extends through all of human history to the end times. The watchers bound in the days of Noah remain bound today, awaiting their final sentencing. Yet not all fallen angels were bound. Some remained free to continue their work under the leadership of Satan. The watchers' specific sin, crossing the boundary to take physical form and reproduce with humans, earned them unique punishment. The judgment executed in stages. First, the archangels were dispatched to bind the leaders. Azazel, who had taught warfare and vanity, received specific mention. He was bound hand and foot, and cast into the darkness, buried under sharp rocks in a desert place called Dudael. Shemihaza and the other chiefs followed. 200 watchers who had sworn the oath on Hermon were gathered, bound, and imprisoned. They saw their wives taken from them, their children condemned, their rebellion ended. Yet the knowledge they had taught could not be unlearned. The secrets they had shared could not be forgotten. Humanity now possessed information about warfare, sorcery, astrology, and enchantments. This knowledge would survive the flood, preserved by those who practiced these arts. The Watchers' physical rebellion ended with their binding. Yet the spiritual corruption they had introduced would plague humanity through all subsequent generations. Their offspring, the Nephilim, still walked the earth when the Watchers were bound. These giants now faced their own judgment. Yet because they were biological beings, not purely spiritual ones, their judgment would take a different form. They would perish in the coming deluge. Yet their spirits would not rest in death as human spirits do. The doom of the giants, the Nephilim, were mortal. Despite their size and strength, despite their angelic heritage, they possessed physical bodies that could be wounded and ultimately destroyed. They were flesh, however corrupted that flesh might be. The flood would drown them like any other creature of land and air. The waters would cover even the highest mountains. No giant, regardless of his stature, could stand tall enough to keep his head above the rising tide. Yet the Nephilim were not simply mortal. They were hybrids, part human, part angelic. And this dual nature created a problem when they died. Human spirits, when the body expires, go to their appointed place. The righteous to Abraham's bosom, the wicked to torment, awaiting final judgment. The body returns to dust. The spirit returns to God who gave it. Angels, being purely spiritual beings, do not die in the same way. They can be bound or cast down, yet their existence continues. They do not have bodies that decay or spirits that separate from flesh. The Nephilim were neither fully human nor fully angelic. When their bodies perished in the flood, their spirits had nowhere to go. They could not return to heaven. They had never belonged there. They were born on earth, conceived in rebellion, the offspring of a union that was forbidden. They could not rest in the grave like humans. The angelic component of their nature prevented the normal human death process. The Book of Enoch describes what happened next. The spirits of the giants, separated from their dead flesh, became a new category of being. Demons, unclean spirits, evil spirits that roam the earth, seeking embodiment. These are not fallen angels. Demons and fallen angels are distinct categories. Fallen angels rebelled with Satan, or descended with the Watchers. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, created through union that was forbidden. This explains several things about demons in Scripture. Why do they seek to possess humans and animals? Because they once had bodies and desperately desire embodiment again. Why are they called unclean? Because they are the offspring of unlawful union, creatures that should never have existed. The legion that possessed the man in the tombs begged not to be sent to the abyss. They requested permission to enter a herd of pigs, rather than remain disembodied. This desperation makes sense if demons are former Nephilim spirits condemned to wander without rest. Jesus described unclean spirits wandering through dry places seeking rest and finding none. Homeless, restless, driven by need for a host body. The judgment on the Nephilim was complete physical destruction. Yet their spirits, the confused and tormented remnants of hybrid beings, became the demonic plague that would afflict humanity through all subsequent ages. The Watchers were bound in Tartarus. The Nephilim died in the flood, yet their spirits became demons. The forbidden knowledge spread through humanity despite the cleansing waters. And somewhere in this corrupted world, one family maintained genetic purity. One bloodline remained untainted by the mingling of divine and human seed. Through this family, the promise made in Eden could continue. The seed of the woman would eventually crush the serpent's head, yet only if that seed remained pure human, uncorrupted by angelic admixture. God found that family, and he commanded them to build a vessel that would carry creation through judgment into a new beginning. The judgment of the Watchers. The heavenly council assembles, not in some distant future, not as a delayed reaction. The moment creation's order fractures, the Ancient of Days convenes his court. The same beings who once sang at the foundation of the world now stand as witnesses to its corruption. The Watchers who descended believed they could hide. They scattered across the world before the flood, dwelling among their hybrid offspring, teaching forbidden arts to their human wives. They moved through settlements as gods, receiving worship, claiming dominion over territories they were never meant to rule. Yet heaven sees everything. The archangels receive their orders. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, each assigned a specific task in the coming judgment. This is not vengeance. This is the restoration of cosmic order, the re-establishment of boundaries that should never have been crossed. Shemihaza, the leader who conceived the oath on the mountain, is summoned first. The being who once stood in the presence of the Most High, who once reflected divine glory, now stands accused. The charges are read. He took human wives. He abandoned his heavenly station. He led 200 angels into rebellion. More than that, he corrupted the bloodline. He introduced violence into creation. He taught humanity secrets meant to remain hidden until appointed times. The sentence comes swift and absolute. Shemihaza will be bound. Not destroyed, because angels cannot cease to exist. Not returned to heaven, because that door is now sealed. Bound instead beneath the earth in a place the Greeks would later call Tartarus, in chains of everlasting darkness for 70 generations. He will remain there until the great day of judgment, when his final fate will be sealed forever. The other leaders receive the same sentence. Azazel, who taught men to forge weapons of war, who showed them how to make instruments of violence from metals drawn from the earth, bound. Barakel, who taught astrology, bound. Kokabiel, who revealed the constellations and their secrets, bound. On by on, the chiefs of the Watchers are seized by the holy angels, and dragged from their earthly thrones. Their human wives watch in horror as beings they thought immortal and invincible are overcome by messengers of the true God. The children born of union that was forbidden witness, their angelic fathers chained and cast into darkness. The earth opens. Deep places prepared before the foundation of the world for this very purpose receive the fallen watchers. They are thrust into chambers beneath mountains, into caverns below the deepest seas. The weight of creation presses down upon them. They cannot escape. They cannot die. They can only wait. The binding is complete. The 200 who descended together are now imprisoned together. Their conspiracy turned into shared torment. The oath they swore on Mount Hermon, meant to distribute guilt equally, now ensures they suffer equally. Yet judgment extends beyond the leaders. The other watchers who participated, who took wives but did not lead the rebellion, face a different fate. They are stripped of their positions, cast out from the heavenly host, forbidden ever to return to their former stations. Some are bound with their leaders. Others are left to wander the earth, watching as everything they corrupted is systematically destroyed. Enoch stands before the watchers one final time. He carries the message from heaven, the words he has been commanded to deliver. The fallen angels plead with him to intercede, to ask mercy on their behalf, to petition the throne for forgiveness. He ascends to heaven with their petition. The answer returns harsh and final. No mercy, no forgiveness, no restoration. They knew the law. They understood the boundary. They chose to cross it anyway, dragging creation into chaos with them. Therefore they will be bound until the end of days. Their names will be remembered only as warnings. Their deeds will be recounted only as examples of rebellion's cost. The watchers who once stood in divine council chambers now crouch in absolute darkness. They who once beheld the face of God now see nothing. They who once moved through dimensions now cannot move at all. Time, which meant nothing to them in eternity, becomes an excruciating crawl toward an inevitable final judgment, 70 generations. Each one marked by human lives lived and ended while they remained frozen in chains. The Book of Enoch records their laments. They weep, they plead, they rage against their confinement. Yet the earth does not yield, the chains do not break, the darkness does not lift. This judgment establishes a precedent that echoes through all subsequent Scripture. Peter references it. Angels who sinned were cast into Tartarus, delivered into chains of darkness, reserved for judgment. Jude confirms it. Angels who did not keep their proper domain but abandoned their own dwelling, he has kept in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. The binding is not secret. It is declared throughout the cosmos as a warning to all created beings, both celestial and terrestrial. The boundary between heaven and earth is absolute. The order of creation is not negotiable. Those who rebel against it will face consequences that extend beyond time itself. Yet the judgment of the watchers is only the beginning. Their offspring still walk the earth. The secrets they taught still spread through human populations. The violence they introduced still escalates. The genetic corruption they caused still threatens the human race. The watchers are bound. Creation itself must now be cleansed. The floodwaters are already gathering in the deep places of the earth, waiting for the appointed moment. Noah's ark rises slowly on dry land, testimony to coming judgment and coming salvation. The fallen angels in their dark prisons can do nothing but listen as the rain begins to fall. The doom of the giants. The giants know something is wrong. They have lived their entire existence as apex predators. Nothing challenges them. Nothing stops them. They take what they want, consume what they desire, dominate every territory they enter. Yet now their fathers are gone. The watchers who sired them, who gave them knowledge and power, have vanished from the earth, seized by holy angels, and cast into darkness beneath the world. The giants are abandoned, half angel, half human, fully belonging to neither realm. They were born into a world that cannot sustain them. Their bodies demand more food than human agriculture can provide. At first, they consumed the labor of human hands, devouring entire harvests meant to feed villages. They ate livestock by the herd. They drained storehouses in single feasts. Then the food ran out. The giants turned predatory. What began as excess became survival, and survival became savagery. They hunted humans as prey. The Book of Enoch records the horror. They consumed human flesh, drank human blood, terrorized the very populations that once revered them as demigods. Some giants turned on animals, violating the created order further by devouring every living thing indiscriminately. Others turned on each other, the strong consuming the weak. Bloodlines established through union that was forbidden now ending in fratricide. The earth filled with violence. Not the violence of war between armies, but the violence of predators unchecked, of beings with angelic power and corrupted human appetites unleashed on a world with no defense against them. Yet the giants possess something their angelic fathers do not: mortal bodies, flesh that can be wounded, blood that can be spilled, lives that can end. And ending is exactly what heaven ordains for them. The giants cannot be allowed to continue. They represent a corruption of two realms, a mixing of essences that violates the fundamental order of creation. They are genetic pollutions, spiritual abominations, walking contradictions of everything God designed. The sentence is death, all of them. Every giant born of the union that was forbidden must perish from the earth. Yet death works differently for the giants than for pure humans. A human dies, and their spirit returns to God who gave it, awaiting resurrection and judgment. An angel cannot die at all, being an immortal spirit. The giants are neither. When their bodies perish, their spirits have nowhere to go. They cannot ascend to heaven because they were never fully angelic. They cannot rest in the grave because they were never fully human. They cannot cease to exist because the angelic component of their nature is immortal. Therefore, they become something new, something unintended by creation, something that will plague humanity for generations to come. Their spirits, severed from their giant bodies, become demons, disembodied entities seeking hosts, seeking embodiment, seeking any way to interact with the physical world they can no longer directly inhabit. The Book of Enoch describes their fate with precision. The spirits of the giants oppress, corrupt, attack, do battle, work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but remain hungry. They thirst, but never drink. They are the walking wounded of the angelic rebellion, the collateral damage of the watcher's lust, the genetic dead ends who refuse to stay dead. As the flood waters rise, the giants die. Some drown in the rising waters. Others perish fighting among themselves for higher ground. Still others are struck down by the direct hand of God, removed from the earth before the waters even arrive. Their massive bodies float in the flood, then sink, then settle into the mud that will become the fossil record. Future generations will dig up their bones and call them mysteries, never quite understanding what they were or where they came from. Yet their spirits remain, unclean, restless, angry. These disembodied entities, the demons that will haunt the pages of the New Testament, are not fallen angels. They are the dead children of fallen angels, the hybrid offspring who lost their bodies yet cannot lose consciousness. They remember being physical. They remember sensation, taste, touch, The experience of inhabiting flesh, they crave it constantly. Therefore, they seek human hosts, attempting to possess living bodies to vicariously experience what they can no longer directly have. This is why demons in the gospel accounts beg Jesus not to send them away, why they plead to enter swine, rather than face disembodiment. They are terrified of the bottomless state they have endured since the flood. Possession is not power for them, but desperate necessity. The giant's doom establishes the origin of spiritual warfare that continues throughout human history. Every demon that Jesus casts out, every unclean spirit that torments the possessed, every spiritual entity that seeks to corrupt and destroy humanity can trace its lineage back to the union that was forbidden. They are the children of angels and women. They are the proof that boundaries matter, that order exists for a reason, that violations of created design have consequences that echo across millennia. The giants die screaming. Their spirits rise from their corpses, freed from flesh yet trapped in consciousness, beginning an existence of torment that will last until the final judgment. Noah watches from the ark as the last giants sink beneath the rising waters. He knows his family is being preserved not just from drowning, but from genetic contamination. The human race will continue through his line, unpolluted by angelic DNA, capable of producing the Messiah who will ultimately crush the serpent's head. The giants are gone, yet their spirits remain, hungry and furious, waiting for any opportunity to reclaim physical existence. The doom of the giants is complete. The next phase of redemption can begin. The spirits of the Nephilim. The rain stops, the waters recede, the ark settles on the mountains. Noah and his family step onto earth that has been cleansed, onto ground purged of the violence and corruption that made the flood necessary. They build an altar, they offer sacrifice, they receive the covenant promise that never again will water destroy all flesh. Yet they are not alone on the earth. The giants are dead, their bodies buried under layers of mud that will harden into sediment, their bones scattered across the ocean floor. Yet something of them persists, something neither living nor dead, neither angelic nor human, neither matter nor pure spirit, the disembodied consciousness of the Nephilim. They wander the world after the flood as unclean spirits, desperately seeking what they lost when their hybrid bodies perished. They remember physicality. They crave sensation. They hunger for the experiences their angelic fathers never needed and their human mothers took for granted. Yet they have no flesh of their own. This is their torment. Awareness without embodiment, consciousness without form, desire without means to satisfy it. They exist in a state creation never intended, a condition that violates both natural and supernatural law. Therefore they do what survival demands. They seek hosts. The act of possession doesn't start as strength. It emerges from desperation instead. The spirits belonging to the deceased giants discover they possess an ability, through methods that aren't completely understood, to enter living human beings. They're capable of overriding human will, taking control of bodies, experiencing physical touch along with taste, and bodily sensations through flesh they've borrowed. However, possession remains unstable. The human body was never meant to contain two separate consciousnesses. The spirit alongside the demon battle for dominance, which creates the tormented behavior, the self-destructive actions that Scripture describes throughout its pages. The man who is possessed cuts his own flesh with stones, makes his dwelling among tombs, proves impossible to restrain with chains. He becomes a walking civil war, a body that's occupied by wills that compete. The demons also realize they're able to enter animals. When Jesus gives permission for a legion of demons to inhabit a herd of swine, they rush into the pigs with violence so extreme that the entire herd stampedes straight off a cliff, drowning themselves in the sea. The demons would actually rather perish with the animals than return to face the void of being without bodies once more. This unveils something essential about their nature. They harbor fear of the abyss. They plead with Jesus, begging him not to send them to that place. The place that fills them with dread isn't hell itself, but rather the state of being bodiless, the terrible consciousness of existing without any form. These aren't the fallen angels who are bound in Tartarus. Those watchers stay chained below the earth, waiting for final judgment. The demons represent their children, the second generation born from rebellion, the unintended consequence that emerged from the forbidden union. They inherit the rebellion of their fathers, but they don't inherit their father's power. They have the ability to oppress humans, but they lack the ability to create. They possess the capacity to corrupt, but they cannot directly kill. They're able to whisper and torment and take possession, but they remain fundamentally weaker than the angels from whom they descended. Still, they pose danger. They possess knowledge that humanity should never possess. They remember the world before the flood, the civilizations that existed before the deluge, the secrets their fathers once taught. They carry understanding of sorcery, of divination, of the occult arts that flourished before the waters arrived. When they take possession of humans, they sometimes speak through their hosts, revealing information the possessed individual could not naturally possess. They identify Jesus as the Son of God before his public ministry even begins. They recognize his authority instantly, not through any faith, but through direct knowledge they possess of the spiritual realm. They create organization. Scripture speaks of principalities alongside powers, of rulers who govern darkness, of spiritual wickedness existing in high places. The demons establish hierarchies. They claim territories. They influence entire cultures. They operate through occult practices, through religions that are false, through any system that draws humans away from their Creator. But they stay homeless. Every body they possess proves temporary. Every host eventually resists or perishes or gets delivered by power that's greater than theirs. They wander through places that are dry, seeking rest but finding none. Their existence stands as testimony to a fundamental spiritual truth. Violations of the created order produce monsters. The angels who crossed the boundary produced children who belong nowhere, who fit into no existing category, who exist in perpetual exile from both heaven as well as earth. The spirits of the Nephilim are beyond redemption. They aren't fallen humans who might choose repentance. They aren't angels who might be restored. They represent genetic and spiritual dead ends, the terminus point of a bloodline that never should have existed. Therefore, their ultimate fate has already been sealed. When the final judgment arrives, when the books get opened, and the dead are raised up, these unclean spirits will be thrown into the lake of fire that was prepared for the devil, along with his angels. They will join their fathers in eternal punishment, bringing an end to a story that began with lust on a mountain and concluded with demons wandering across the earth. Until that day arrives, they continue to rage. They continue possessing. They continue corrupting. They remember being mighty, and they hate being weak. They remember having bodies, and they despise their state without bodies. The Nephilim perished in the flood, but their spirits continue to exist, testament to a union that was forbidden. Proof that boundaries exist for reasons. Evidence that certain doors, once they're opened, release consequences that echo across millennia. The descendants of Noah multiply across the earth, unaware that they're sharing the world with the angry ghosts belonging to a dead hybrid race. The corruption of all flesh. The world before the flood reaches a tipping point. The phrase shows up in Genesis with surgical precision. All flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. Not some flesh, not most flesh, but all flesh. This represents total corruption, complete contamination, a saturation point where the original design of humanity has been violated so thoroughly that nothing pure remains. The Hebrew word for corrupted, which is shakat, means ruined, spoiled, perverted. It describes something that has deviated so far from its intended function that it's beyond repair, only replacement. What took place? The forbidden union between watchers and women who were human introduced DNA that was angelic into the human gene pool. The giants represented the first generation of hybrids. But the contamination didn't stop with them. Their children had children of their own. Their descendants married into pure human lines. The genetic pollution spread outward. This wasn't merely moral corruption, though that existed in great abundance. This was biological corruption, a literal alteration of human genetics that threatened the species itself. God created humanity with specific design specifications. The human genome, when untainted, carried the capacity to produce the Messiah. The seed of the woman, promised in Eden after the fall, required an uncorrupted human bloodline to fulfill the prophecy. But the serpent grasped this. If he could manage to corrupt all human flesh, the promise couldn't be fulfilled. If no pure human remained in existence, the Messiah couldn't be born. The cosmic war that was initiated in Eden could be won through genetic warfare. Therefore, the corruption picked up speed. The line of Cain, already marked by violence and distance from God, intermarried with lines that were touched by the Nephilim. The line of Seth, the godly line, the lineage through which the promise would flow, faced pressure from every direction. The sons of God observed that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from all whom they chose. The language suggests universal choice, selection without discrimination, the breaking down of all boundaries. No lineage stayed protected, no family remained isolated. The mixing became comprehensive. Violence filled the earth, not just because giants were hunting humans, but because human nature itself was being warped. The hybrid bloodlines carried tendencies toward aggression, toward dominance, toward behaviors that violated the created order. The earth mourned. Creation itself groaned under the weight of this corruption. Blood cried out from the ground where the innocent had been slain. The natural world, subjected to futility by human rebellion, reached its limit. God looked upon the earth, and he saw that it was corrupt, that all flesh had corrupted its way. The language mirrors the creation account, but in reverse. Where God once saw that everything was very good, he now sees that everything has become very bad. The verdict arrives swiftly. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man as well as beast and creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. This isn't divine regret in the sense of a mistake. This is divine grief. The Hebrew word naham carries the sense of profound sorrow, of being moved to the core by what has taken place. God grieves over what his creation has become. But destruction isn't the end of the story. Even in announcing judgment, God is planning rescue. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. One man, one family, one uncorrupted bloodline remains on the entire planet. This isn't coincidence. This is preservation. Throughout the spreading contamination, throughout the intermarriage and genetic pollution, one line stayed pure. The line from Adam through Seth, through Enoch, through Enoch, through Methuselah, through Lamech, through Noah, maintained its human-only DNA. Noah gets described as perfect in his generations. The Hebrew word tamim means complete, whole, without blemish. This is the same word used to describe sacrificial animals that must be genetically pure, without defect. Noah's perfection isn't moral but genetic. His generations, his genealogy, his family line, remained unpolluted by DNA that was angelic. He is fully human, exactly as God designed humanity to be. This is why God chooses him, not because he's sinless, though he is called righteous, but because his bloodline remains uncorrupted, capable of carrying the seed of the woman forward, capable of producing descendants, through whom the Messiah will eventually come. The corruption of all flesh creates the necessity for the flood. If the entire human race becomes contaminated, if no pure human remains, then the promise to Eve can't be fulfilled. The serpent will have won through genetic warfare what he couldn't win through direct temptation. But one family remains untouched. One line stays pure. One man, along with his wife and his 3 sons, and their wives, carry uncontaminated human DNA. Therefore, the flood becomes both judgment as well as rescue, judgment on the world that's corrupted, rescue for the remnant that's uncorrupted. The ark begins to make sense in this light. It isn't just a boat. It's a genetic preservation chamber. It carries the only pure human specimens remaining on earth, plus representatives of every animal kind, ensuring that creation can begin again from stock that's uncorrupted. The waters that destroy also cleanse. They wash away the giants, the hybrid bloodlines, the genetic pollution that threatened to end the human race. They reset creation to its original design, preserving only what remains true to God's intended pattern. Noah stands as proof that even in total corruption, grace finds a way. Even when all flesh has gone astray, God preserves a remnant. Even when the enemy appears to have won through contamination, the Creator maintains the bloodline through which redemption will come. The corruption of all flesh is complete. The rescue of one family has begun. Noah, the pure bloodline. 10 generations from Adam to Noah. 10 links in a chain that must not break. The genealogy in Genesis reads like a countdown. Adam fathers Seth. Seth fathers Enosh. Enosh fathers Kenan. Each name carries forward the promise, the seed of the woman that will one day crush the head of the serpent. But surrounding this precious line, corruption spreads like plague. The Nephilim walk across the earth. The genetic contamination picks up speed. Hybrid bloodlines multiply across every continent, every settlement, every tribe. The line of Seth faces constant pressure. Intermarriage with contaminated lines isn't just possible, but probable. The daughters of men are beautiful. The temptation to join with other families, to strengthen alliances through marriage, to expand influence through union with powerful clans, all of this works against genetic purity. Yet, somehow, impossibly, the line holds. Enoch walks with God and is taken, removed from the corrupting world before the worst arrives. Methuselah lives 969 years, the longest-lived human, his very existence serving as a delay of judgment. Tradition suggests his name means, when he dies, it shall come, and the flood arrives the year he dies. Lamech fathers Noah and prophesies. This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. He names his son Noah. Rest, comfort, relief. The name itself is prophetic, pointing toward a man who will bring rest from the violence and chaos that's consuming the world. Noah grows up knowing he's different. His family maintains practices the rest of the world has abandoned. They worship the true God while others bow to the giants as deities. They preserve knowledge of creation's order while others embrace the corrupted wisdom that was taught by the watchers. Most importantly, they guard their bloodline. Noah's parents ensure he marries within the pure line. His wife comes from stock that's uncorrupted. Their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, are born fully human, carrying no trace of DNA that's angelic. This isn't accident. This is protection. God superintends this bloodline because the entire plan of redemption depends on it. If Noah's line becomes contaminated, the Messiah cannot come. If the pure human genome is lost, the incarnation becomes impossible. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. The word perfect, tamim, describes a sacrificial animal that's without blemish. It speaks to genetic completeness, to wholeness, according to original design. Noah's generations, his genealogy, his family tree shows no corruption, no hybrid crosses, no contamination that's angelic. This makes him unique on the planet. Perhaps the last pure human family in existence. When God speaks to Noah, the command is specific. Build an ark. Bring your wife, your sons, their wives. Bring animals by pairs, male and female, to preserve their kinds. The instruction reveals the purpose. This isn't just escape from drowning. This is genetic preservation. The ark will carry the seed stock for rebuilding creation according to its original design. Noah obeys without question. He spends decades building a massive ship on dry land, facing mockery from a world that has never seen rain, that cannot imagine judgment, that believes the giants, along with their fathers, have made them invincible. But Noah understands something the corrupted world does not. Boundaries matter. Design matters. The distinction between human and angelic matters. The preservation of what God created matters more than power, more than knowledge, more than the abilities the watchers promised he builds. Year after year, the ark grows. His sons help, his wife supports. The pure bloodline continues its work, preparing the vessel that will carry humanity's future through coming judgment. The world watches and laughs. The giants mock this foolish man who's building a boat for a flood that will never come. The corrupted humans, consumed with their own pleasures and violence, pay little attention to the righteous man and his strange project. But heaven watches differently. Angels observe the faithful builder, the man who maintains purity in a polluted world, the family that holds the line when every other line has fallen. Noah represents the principle that will echo through all Scripture. The remnant, the faithful few, the preserved seed, the ones who maintain truth when the majority embraces lies, who preserve design when others violate it, who trust God's word when everyone else trusts their own eyes. His bloodline, pure, uncorrupted, fully human, carries the future of the species. Through him, the promise to Eve will continue. Through his descendants, nations will rise. Through his line, eventually, the Messiah will come. But first, the judgment. First, the waters. First, the cleansing of a world so corrupted that only one family remains worth saving. Noah finishes the ark. He seals it with pitch. He loads the animals, male and female, according to their kinds. He brings his family aboard. Then he waits. The door stands open. God has commanded him to enter. But still the door remains open, offering a final opportunity for any who might turn. No one comes. The world continues its violence, its corruption, its rebellion. The giants hunt, the demons whisper, the hybrid bloodlines multiply. Then God himself closes the door. Not Noah, God. The pure bloodline is sealed inside. The corrupted world is sealed outside. 7 days pass in silence. Then the fountains of the great deep burst open. The windows of heaven open. The rain begins. Noah, along with his family, the last pure humans on earth, ride the rising waters above a world being washed clean of genetic pollution. The bloodline is preserved. The seed of the woman continues. The plan of redemption moves forward. Carried on an ark through judgment to new beginning. The ark, God's rescue mission. The first drop falls. Noah has spent 120 years preparing for this moment. Every plank placed, every joint sealed, every supply stored has been active faith in a promise that seemed impossible. Now the impossible begins. The rain falls gently at first, soft drops against the ark's roof, the sound that will continue without ceasing for 40 days and 40 nights. But rain isn't the primary weapon of this judgment. The fountains of the deep burst open. Underground reservoirs of water held beneath the earth's crust, since creation explode upward with catastrophic force. The Hebrew word mabul, used only for Noah's flood, describes something far more violent than simple rain. It describes cataclysm, the breaking apart of the world's structure. The ground splits, water rockets from the depths. The crust itself fractures as the stable world Noah knew tears apart beneath his feet. But he doesn't feel it. The ark sits firm on ground that will soon be ocean floor, its massive dimensions keeping it stable even as the earth convulses around it. The windows of heaven open. The firmament that separates the waters above from the waters below releases its store. What protected earth from cosmic flood now pours down in judgment. The rain comes not in showers but in torrents, in sheets, in an unending deluge that transforms atmosphere into ocean. Water rises fast. The people outside the ark realize too late that the crazy old man was right. They run for high ground. They pound on the ark's door. They scream for Noah to open it, to let them in, to save them from the rising waters. But the door is sealed, not by Noah, but by God. No human hand can open what God has closed. The ark begins to lift, slowly at first as water reaches its massive hull, then more noticeably as the flood deepens, raising the vessel above the ground that has been its foundation for decades. Inside, Noah's family feels the movement, the slight rocking, the realization that they're no longer on solid earth, but floating on water that continues to rise. 8 people, the entire future of humanity. Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, Japheth, their 3 wives. 8 individuals with uncorrupted bloodlines, carrying the genetic purity needed to restart the human race. But they're not alone. The ark teems with life. Animals fill the interior according to God's precise instructions. Clean animals by 7s, unclean by pairs. Birds of every kind. Creatures that creep, that swim, that fly, each according to its kind. The phrase repeated throughout Genesis, emphasizing that God preserves distinct categories, clear boundaries, original design. The animals came to Noah without coercion. They arrived at the ark voluntarily, driven by instinct placed within them by their Creator. The lions didn't hunt. The wolves didn't attack. The prey animals showed no fear. For this brief time the curse is suspended. Creation cooperates in its own salvation. The ark itself is a masterpiece of divine engineering. Its dimensions, 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high, create perfect stability. Naval architects confirm that these proportions make the vessel virtually impossible to capsize. It will not sink, it will not roll. It will ride out any storm, because this isn't merely a boat. It's a rescue chamber, a genetic vault, a preservation module carrying the blueprints for recreating the world according to original specifications. The water rises past the tops of the hills, past the highest mountains, 15 cubits above the tallest peaks. The entire world becomes ocean. Every air-breathing creature not on the ark drowns. The giants die, their massive bodies sinking into mud. The corrupted humans perish, their hybrid bloodlines ending in churning water. But the ark floats, secure, stable, preserved. Inside, Noah's family tends the animals. They feed them from carefully calculated stores. They manage waste. They maintain order in a floating zoo that contains representatives of all created kinds. This isn't punishment for them. This is purpose. They're not refugees fleeing disaster, but custodians managing salvation. God has trusted them with the future of creation itself. The rain continues, day after day, week after week. The sound becomes constant, a drumming reminder that judgment proceeds outside while grace shelters within. 40 days pass, the rain stops, but water covers the earth. No land appears, no mountain breaks the surface. The world is baptized, immersed completely, washed clean of the corruption that made this necessary. The ark drifts for months. It floats on the endless ocean, carrying its precious cargo above the judged world. God has not forgotten them. The text emphasizes this. God remembered Noah. Remembering in Hebrew means more than mere recollection. It means acting with purpose, implementing plans, moving toward fulfillment of promise. God remembers. Therefore, things begin to change. A wind passes over the earth. The waters start to recede. The fountains of the deep close. The windows of heaven seal. The sources of the flood shut down as precisely as they opened. The ark comes to rest, not gently beached, but firmly grounded on the mountains of Ararat. The vessel that saved humanity settles into position on high ground, waiting for the waters to fully retreat. Noah sends out birds, a raven that flies back and forth, a dove that returns because no dry land exists. 7 days later, another dove that comes back with an olive leaf, fresh green, proof that somewhere below, vegetation has survived, has already begun growing again. 7 more days. Another dove. This one doesn't return. It has found a place to land, to nest, to begin again. The waters recede further. The earth dries. God speaks. Leave the ark. Bring out every living thing. Let them multiply on the earth, and be fruitful and increase. Noah opens the door. The same door God sealed is now opened by human hands. The family emerges into air washed clean, onto ground purged of corruption, under skies that promise covenant. They release the animals. The creatures scatter to fill the earth again, each according to its kind. The genetic diversity preserved in the ark begins to spread, populating continents, filling ecosystems, restoring creation. Noah builds an altar. He offers sacrifice from the clean animals brought for this purpose. The smoke rises, a sweet aroma to God, the first worship in the new world. And God promises, never again will flood destroy all flesh, never again will judgment come by water. The rainbow appears as a sign, a covenant reminder that spans the sky. The rescue is complete. 8 people and countless animals have survived the greatest cataclysm in history. The pure bloodline is preserved. Creation can begin again, washed clean, returned to its original design. The ark has served its purpose. It will sit as memorial on the mountain, testimony to judgment survived and grace received. Proof that God saves the faithful, even when the entire world falls under condemnation. Noah's family steps into their new commission. Fill the earth. Start again. Preserve what has been saved. The rescue mission has succeeded. The seed of the woman continues. The plan moves forward, carried through floodwater into covenant promise. The binding in Tartarus. Beneath the earth. In places prepared before creation, the watchers suffer. Not death. Angels cannot die. Not annihilation. They remain fully conscious, fully aware. Instead, they experience something worse than either. Endless confinement, unbreakable chains, absolute darkness. The Greek word Tartarus appears only once in Scripture. In Peter's second letter, he describes angels who sinned, who were cast down to Tartarus, who were delivered into chains of darkness, reserved for judgment. This isn't Hades, the temporary holding place for dead humans. This isn't Gehenna, the final lake of fire. This is something else entirely. A maximum security prison for angelic criminals. Beings who violated creation's most fundamental boundaries. The watchers who descended to take human wives, who abandoned their heavenly stations, who taught forbidden knowledge and fathered the Nephilim, now occupy these dark cells. Shemi-Hazah, Azazel, Azael, the 200 who swore the oath on Mount Hermon. They're bound individually, yet collectively. Each suffers alone, yet remains aware of the other's torment. The oath that once united them in rebellion now unites them in punishment. No escape, no parole, no hope of reduction in sentence. 70 generations. The Book of Enoch specifies 70 human generations from the time of binding until the day of final judgment. They will remain imprisoned while humanity rebuilds, while nations rise and fall, while the Messiah comes and conquers and returns. The chains are described as everlasting, eternal, unbreakable. These aren't physical restraints, but spiritual bonds that prevent movement, prevent action, prevent any influence over the world they corrupted. Darkness surrounds them, not merely absence of light, but oppressive, tangible blackness. The beings who once beheld the throne room, who reflected divine glory, who moved in celestial light, now exist in perpetual night. They cannot see, they cannot move. They can only remember what they were and contemplate what they have become. Jude confirms Peter's account, adding details. Angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. The language emphasizes permanence. Reserved, everlasting, until the great day. These aren't temporary measures, but holding patterns that extend across millennia. The watchers who remain unbound, those who sinned but did not participate in the taking of wives, face a different fate. They are cast to earth, stripped of authority, reduced to wandering spirits. These become the principalities and powers, the rulers of darkness, the spiritual forces of wickedness that Paul describes. But the worst offenders, the leaders of the great rebellion, the ones who physically crossed the angel-human boundary, they're utterly removed from the playing field, locked away where they cannot repeat their crime, cannot corrupt another generation, cannot interfere with the plan of redemption. Their binding serves multiple purposes. First, justice. They violated the created order in the most egregious way possible. They introduced corruption that required global judgment to cleanse. They fathered monsters that terrorized the earth. They taught secrets that accelerated human wickedness. Therefore, they suffer consequences commensurate with their crimes. Second, protection. If the watchers remained free, they might repeat their offense. They might descend again, might take more wives, might produce more Nephilim. The binding ensures this particular sin cannot recur. Third, testimony. Their imprisonment stands as cosmic warning. Every created being, angel and human alike, knows what happened to the watchers who crossed the boundary. The empty seats in the heavenly council testify to the cost of rebellion. Fourth, demonstration. God's authority is absolute. He created the angels. He assigns their domains. When they violate his orders, he possesses power to imprison them in darkness. No created being is beyond his reach or outside his jurisdiction. The watchers experience time differently than humans. For them, 70 generations isn't abstract future, but extended present. They count each passing moment, each human lifetime, knowing that eventually the chain will reach its end and their final judgment will arrive. They rage in their confinement. They lament their choices. They plead for mercy that will not come. The Book of Enoch records their petitions to Enoch, their desperate requests for intercession, all denied. They know how the story ends. They possess angelic intellect, understanding of prophecy, awareness of God's plans. They know that when the 70 generations complete, when the great day arrives, they will be cast into the lake of fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. But until that day, they wait, bound, dark, helpless. Their binding also explains much about spiritual warfare in the present age. The most powerful angels who rebelled are off the board. Satan and his demons operate with significant limitations precisely because their heavy artillery is imprisoned. The temptations, the persecutions, the spiritual attacks that believers face come from the lesser fallen angels, from the demons who are the spirits of the dead Nephilim. The watchers themselves cannot participate. They can only watch. Ironically appropriate for beings once called watchers, as God's plan unfolds without them. Their story serves as the ultimate cautionary tale. They possessed glory. They held authority. They stood in God's presence. They abandoned everything for temporary pleasure, for forbidden union, for power they were never meant to have. Now they own nothing but chains and darkness and the knowledge that worse awaits. The binding in Tartarus is complete. The watchers who corrupted the world before the flood cannot corrupt the world after the flood. They're removed, isolated, imprisoned until the end of all things. Above them, humanity begins again. Noah's descendants multiply, nations form, cultures develop, and though fallen angels still operate, though demons still tempt and oppress, the worst offenders remain locked away, unable to repeat the sin that brought the flood. The chains hold. The darkness remains. The watchers count the generations, waiting for the judgment they know is coming. The post-flood return. The earth is new, washed, clean. Noah's family descends from the ark onto ground purged of corruption. They worship. They receive covenant. They begin the work of refilling a planet empty except for them and the animals they preserved. The genetic pollution is gone. The hybrid bloodlines ended in the flood. The giants drowned. The watchers are bound in Tartarus. The plan of redemption can proceed through a pure human line. Then something impossible happens. The giants return. Not everywhere at once, not in the same massive scale as before the flood, but they appear in specific territories, in particular bloodlines, in concentrations that suggest purpose, not accident. Genesis records it with disturbing simplicity. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Afterward. After the flood. After the cleansing. After the judgment that was supposed to end the hybrid race forever. How? The Scripture doesn't explain directly, but it provides clues. The giants appear most densely in Canaan, the land God promises to Abraham. They cluster in specific regions. Hebron, where Anak fathers the Anakim. Gath, where Goliath and his brothers dominate. The Valley of Rephaim, named for the giant clans. Several explanations exist, each with supporting evidence and troubling implications. Theory 1. One of Noah's daughters-in-law carried recessive Nephilim genetics. The flood destroyed all flesh except those on the ark. If even one woman aboard carried contaminated DNA, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps as a recessive gene, the giants could resurface in later generations. Theory 2. The Bound Watchers managed a second incursion. Though imprisoned, they might have found a way to corrupt human genetics again before their chains fully tightened. Or different fallen angels, unbound and still operating, repeated the original sin in limited scope. Theory 3. The demons, the disembodied spirits of the dead giants, influenced breeding or possessed humans in ways that produced giant offspring. The giant spirits might carry the blueprint of their physical form, capable of manifesting in subsequent generations through methods not fully understood. Regardless of how the giants appear, the Bible doesn't hide this uncomfortable truth. It names them. It describes their territories. It records Israel's encounters with them. The Anakim descend from Anak, son of Arba. They're so fearsome that 10 of the 12 spies sent into Canaan returned terrified. We saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, who come from the giants. We were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. The Rephaim occupy the land east of the Jordan. King Og of Bashan, a remnant of these giants, sleeps in an iron bed measuring 13.5 feet long. His defeat requires divine intervention. The Emim, the Zamzumim, tribes of giants mentioned in Deuteronomy, conquered by earlier peoples, but testifying to the persistence of hybrid bloodlines. Goliath stands 9 feet 9 inches tall. His armor weighs 125 pounds. His spear is like a weaver's beam. He has 4 brothers, all giants, all possessing extra fingers and toes, 6 on each hand, 6 on each foot. This genetic abnormality suggests something beyond normal human variation. Why does God allow them to return? The post-flood giants serve a different purpose than their ancestors before the flood. They're not global pandemic, but localized infection. They concentrate in Canaan for a specific reason. They guard the promised land. Satan understands that God has chosen this territory for his people. He understands that from this land, through this people, the Messiah will come. Therefore, he fortifies Canaan with giants, making it as difficult as possible for Israel to claim their inheritance. This is cosmic warfare fought through genetics. The giants aren't mere obstacles, but strategic deployments designed to prevent God's plan from advancing. If Israel cannot conquer Canaan, they cannot establish the kingdom. If they cannot establish the kingdom, the Messiah cannot come through them. God's response is direct and uncompromising. He commands Israel to utterly destroy the giants, not capture them, not enslave them, not make treaties with them. Destroy them completely. This isn't genocide, but genetic warfare. The giants must be removed because they represent corruption of the created order. They're the enemy's genetic weapons, designed to block the promise and pollute the bloodline. Joshua leads the conquest. The giants fall. Hebron is cleansed. The Anakim are destroyed except for remnants in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. The land is purged of the hybrid bloodlines, but some survive. Goliath proves that giant genetics persist into David's time. Centuries after Joshua, the battle continues across generations. each appearance of giants requiring another round of extermination. David understands what the 10 fearful spies did not. The giants aren't invincible. They're flesh. They can be struck down. He approaches Goliath not with human confidence, but with faith in the God who preserves Israel for a purpose. 1 stone, 1 shot. The giant falls. David's mighty men continue the work, hunting down Goliath's brothers, systematically eliminating the giant bloodline. Each brother destroyed is another genetic dead end, another removal of corrupted DNA from the promised land. The post-flood giants serve as reminder that the war initiated in Eden continues. The serpent's seed versus the woman's seed. Satan's attempts to corrupt versus God's determination to preserve. Hybrid bloodlines versus pure human genetics. But the pattern is clear. Where giants appear, God raises up deliverers. Where corruption resurfaces, purging follows. The promise will not be stopped. The bloodline will be preserved. The Messiah will come despite every attempt to prevent it through genetic warfare. The giants return after the flood, but their return is limited, controlled, ultimately unsuccessful. They concentrate in specific territories that God then conquers. They produce champions that God then defeats. They guard the promised land that God then gives to his people. The watchers remain bound. Their children remain dead. The post-flood giants are the last gasp of a corrupted bloodline that cannot ultimately prevail. The return happens, but the outcome is already determined. The seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head. The giants cannot stop this. They can only delay, resist, make the path difficult, but they cannot prevent the inevitable. The Messiah is coming, born of a virgin, untainted by corrupted genetics, fully human and fully divine. The post-flood giants are a footnote to that story. Obstacles overcome, enemies defeated, proof that God's plan proceeds despite all opposition. The cosmic war. Eden begins it. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This isn't merely prediction. This is declaration of war. Seed versus seed. Bloodline versus bloodline. The serpent's descendants against the woman's offspring, fighting for control of human destiny. Everything that follows flows from this moment. Every attack, every corruption, every attempt to prevent the Messiah from coming. The serpent understands what many humans miss. Prophecy isn't fate, but promise requiring fulfillment. The seed of the woman will crush his head, but only if that seed actually arrives. If he can corrupt all human flesh, if he can pollute every bloodline, the promise can't be fulfilled. Therefore, genetic warfare becomes his primary weapon. The first strategy: direct corruption. Send watchers to take human wives. Produce hybrids. Contaminate the gene pool. Make it impossible for a fully human Messiah to be born because no fully human line remains. This nearly succeeds. All flesh corrupts its way. Only Noah remains pure. The flood washes away the corruption, but it was desperately close. The second strategy: concentrated resistance. Since global corruption failed, localize the giants in the Promised Land. Make Canaan impregnable. Fill it with monsters. Force Israel to fight through hybrid bloodlines to claim their inheritance. This delays but doesn't stop. Joshua conquers, David finishes. The land is cleansed enough for the kingdom to establish. The third strategy: corrupt the kingship. If the Messiah must come through David's line, attack that line. send enemies against David's descendants, tempt them to intermarry with pagan nations, lead them into idolatry. This damages, but doesn't destroy. The line persists through captivity, through occupation, through centuries of waiting. But the attacks aren't random. They follow a pattern. Strike at the bloodline, corrupt the genetics, prevent the pure human birth. Cain rises against Abel. The godly line from Seth almost intermarries completely with the ungodly line from Cain. Abraham is told to sacrifice Isaac, the son of promise. Jacob's sons sell Joseph into slavery. Pharaoh orders male Hebrew babies drowned. Haman plots to exterminate all Jews. Each attack targets the same thing: the preservation of the bloodline through which the Messiah will come. The cosmic war is fought on earth through human history. Angels and demons operate behind visible events. The serpent's seed works to corrupt. God's preservation works to protect. Physical battles reflect spiritual conflict. When Israel fights the giants, they're engaging in cosmic warfare, whether they realize it or not. Every giant destroyed is a victory in the larger war. Every hybrid bloodline eliminated is protection for the promise. The prophets understand this. They speak of the coming one, the seed of the woman, the child born to crush the serpent. They describe his lineage with precision because the lineage matters. He must be fully human. He must descend through David. He must fulfill the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Satan knows these requirements. Therefore he attacks these exact points. Corrupt the lineage. Prevent the fulfillment. Stop the Messiah from being born. But God protects, supernaturally, persistently. Through famines and wars and exiles and near extinctions, the bloodline survives. Always a remnant, always a preserved seed, always a continuation despite impossible odds. The cosmic war escalates as the time approaches. Herod, possessed by demonic fury, orders the slaughter of children in Bethlehem. He's trying to destroy the Messiah before the Messiah can fulfill his mission. But the baby escapes to Egypt. The bloodline is protected one more time. The promise moves forward. The war isn't only about genetics, it's about cosmic authority. The serpent rebelled in Eden, claiming independence from God. The Watchers rebelled before the flood, claiming access to human women. The demons operate in rebellion, claiming territories and tormenting humanity. But each rebellion faces the same ultimate defeat. The seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head. Not merely wound, not merely defeat. Crush, total, final, irreversible victory. The cross becomes the decisive battle. When Jesus dies, Satan believes he has won. The seed of the woman is destroyed. The promise is ended. The bloodline terminates on a Roman execution device. But 3 days later, the tomb opens. The Messiah rises. Death is defeated. The serpent's head is crushed exactly as prophesied. Everything the Watchers attempted, corrupting flesh, producing giants, teaching forbidden knowledge, fails to prevent this moment. Everything the demons tried, possession, temptation, opposition, cannot stop the plan. The cosmic war continues after the resurrection, but the outcome is already determined. Satan is defeated. The giants are destroyed. The demons await judgment. The Watchers remain bound in Tartarus. The war that began in Eden will conclude in Revelation. The final battle, the final judgment. The lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. But the victory was secured at the cross. The seed of the woman crushed the serpent's head. The pure bloodline, preserved through millennia of attacks, produced the Messiah who defeats death itself. The forbidden union attempted to prevent this. The Watchers tried to corrupt what God determined to preserve. They failed completely. The cosmic war teaches fundamental truth. God's promises cannot be stopped. His plans will be fulfilled. Human rebellion, angelic rebellion, demonic opposition, none of it changes the outcome. The seed of the woman wins, the serpent loses. The story that began with a promise in Eden concludes with that promise fulfilled in Christ. The virgin birth, the final solution. Every attack has failed. The bloodline persists. The time arrives. A virgin in Nazareth receives an impossible message. She will conceive without human father. She will bear a son who will save his people from their sins. She will participate in the final solution to the problem that began in Eden. The virgin birth isn't random miracle. It's strategic necessity. The entire cosmic war has been fought over genetics. The serpent's seed versus the woman's seed. Hybrid corruption versus pure humanity. Angelic DNA versus human DNA. Every previous human is born of both mother and father. Both contribute genetic material. Both pass down ancestry. Both transmit whatever corruption exists in their lines. But Jesus is conceived by the Holy Spirit. He has no human father, no paternal DNA, no male contribution to his genetic structure. He is the seed of the woman, literally, exclusively, exactly as prophesied in Genesis 3:15. This bypasses every contamination. If corrupted genetics entered humanity through male lines, the Watchers took human wives, not husbands, then conception without human father ensures purity. If Satan's attacks focused on corrupting male lineages, then birth from woman alone circumvents the attack. Mary herself descends from David. Her lineage is documented, preserved, protected through centuries. She's fully human, carrying uncorrupted DNA, capable of providing the human nature the Messiah requires. But the child in her womb is more than human. The Holy Spirit overshadows her. The power of the Most High comes upon her. The Word becomes flesh. Divine nature united with human nature in one person. This is the mystery the Watchers could never achieve. They crossed the angel-human boundary through forbidden union, producing monsters. God crosses the divine-human boundary through miraculous conception, producing the Messiah. The difference is authority. The Watchers had no right to take human wives. They violated boundaries God established. Their offspring were abominations, genetic corruption, beings that should never have existed. God has every right to unite divine and human natures. He's the Creator. He established the boundaries and can cross them for redemptive purposes. The Incarnation isn't violation, but fulfillment. Not corruption, but restoration. Jesus is fully God and fully human. Not a hybrid, not a mixture, not half of each. Completely divine, completely human. Two natures in one person. This solves the problem the Watchers created. The Nephilim were unstable mixtures, beings who fit nowhere, who corrupted both realms they touched. Jesus is stable unity, a person who perfectly represents both divinity and humanity, who mediates between heaven and earth. He cannot sin because he's divine. He can suffer because he's human. He understands temptation because he experiences it in human flesh. He defeats temptation because he responds with divine power. The virgin birth also protects the bloodline at the final moment. Every previous generation faced the threat of corruption. Adam and Eve could fall. Noah could be contaminated. David's line could intermarry with pagan nations. But Mary's conception requires no male contribution. The purity of the Messiah's humanity is guaranteed, not by careful breeding through centuries, but by divine intervention at the moment of conception. Satan cannot corrupt what God directly creates. The demons cannot influence what the Holy Spirit overshadows. The genetics are protected because one parent isn't genetic at all, but supernatural. This is the final defeat of the Watchers' strategy. They tried to prevent the Messiah by corrupting all flesh. God produces the Messiah through a woman who bypasses male flesh entirely. The virgin birth also fulfills prophecy with precision. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Not a young woman, not a maiden, a virgin. The Hebrew word Alma and the Greek word Parthenos both emphasize virginity. This isn't biological impossibility overcome, but theological necessity fulfilled. The Messiah must be born of a woman, fully human. The Messiah must be born without human father, untainted by corrupted male lines. The virgin birth is the only way both requirements can be met. Jesus grows in Mary's womb like any human child. He's born in Bethlehem like any human baby. He experiences hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain. He's tempted in all ways like every human, but he never sins, never corrupts, never falls. He maintains perfect obedience where Adam failed, where Noah's descendants failed, where David's sons failed. He's the second Adam, the new beginning, the uncorrupted human who fulfills what humanity was always meant to be. When he dies on the cross, he dies as a human, experiencing the full weight of judgment that should fall on corrupted humanity. When he rises from the tomb, he rises as the first truly incorruptible human, demonstrating what resurrection will be for all who trust in him. The virgin birth makes it all possible. The Watchers tried to corrupt the seed. God produced the seed through a virgin. The serpent tried to prevent the crushing of his head. God crushed it through the offspring of a woman who conceived without human father. Every attack is answered. Every strategy is countered. Every attempt to corrupt the bloodline is overcome by supernatural protection, culminating in supernatural conception. The cosmic war that began with a promise in Eden ends with fulfillment in Bethlehem. The seed of the woman arrives, born of a virgin, carrying pure humanity, untainted by the Watcher's corruption, ready to defeat the serpent, bind the demons, and judge the fallen angels. The virgin birth isn't just miracle, it's victory. The final solution to the problem of the forbidden union. The ultimate answer to the question that drove the entire cosmic conflict. How can a pure human Messiah be born from a corrupted human race? Answer: through a virgin, by the Holy Spirit, according to prophecy, fulfilling promise, crushing the serpent's head exactly as declared from the beginning. The forbidden union is defeated. The Watchers remain bound. The giants are destroyed. The demons await judgment. And the seed of the woman reigns forever.